and welcome to our level 2.1 notes for our ecology menu 2. This set of notes are going to cover the human impacts on biodiversity. So you should have already done level 1.1 notes that covered the different types of biodiversity. We defined biodiversity and went into our three categories. You also went into how to calculate biodiversity. Now we're going to look at how can humans impact or affect those different levels of biodiversity. And specifically, we're going to look at 5 big impacts. So, in order to complete this set of notes, you will need to have this worksheet here. It should be pink. It says level 2.1 notes, human impacts on biodiversity. The big sign to know that you have the right assignment is these 5 empty lines here, where we're going to write the 5 categories, the 5 big impacts that humans cause. Alright, let's continue chugging along. So, again, you are filling in the blanks. What is a human impact? Let's start with just defining the term human impact before we even go into the 5 different categories. So, a human impact, these are changes that people cause in the environment that affect both living things, which we earlier had defined as biotic, and non-living parts are abiotic factors. So human impacts, this is people changing things in the environment that affect both living biotic and non-living abiotic parts. There's 2 types of human impacts, 2 ways that you can see human impacts, and we classify those as either direct or indirect. So direct human impacts are changes, consequences that we can see right away. For example, cutting down a forest. We can see those consequences instantaneously. As soon as those trees are all clear cut, we can see the change in the ecosystem. We can already start to see the habitat destruction. Versus indirect, these are slower, less obvious changes or consequences. They take more time, they build up before we get to really see those consequences hit home. Examples of that are going to be things like climate change and global warming, burning fuel that we've been doing since the 1800s, and now we're seeing the consequences of warming the planet. It's taken over 100 years, but with all that time, the carbon has severely accumulated in our atmosphere, and now we're starting to see those consequences. And those are indirect human impacts, still hurting the planet, but they take longer to see the consequences. Nonetheless, whether it's a direct or an indirect human impact, these changes that cause the environment to be altered due to human actions is that human impacts put stress on the living things, and they can reduce variety or this biodiversity in nature. So specifically, that is something I really want you to keep in mind while going throughout these 5 big impacts, is that all of these impacts are going to put stress on living things, and they're going to reduce biodiversity. We're covering negative human impacts. Of course, I don't want to disregard the fact that humans can do positive things and they can have positive impacts on the environment, but due to the standard, our big thing is looking at negative impacts on biodiversity. So let's chug forward into what are the 5 big categories. So on those 5 big empty lines, you're going to fill this out, starting with number 1, habitat destruction. With this, we're going to start with the more direct human impacts, and then as we go further down the list and into the presentation, we'll get to the more indirect. the long-term, slower process consequences. So number 1, habitat destruction. Number 2, overexploitation. Number 3, pollution. Number 4, invasive species. And then number 5, climate change. So I'm going to start with the ones that we can see very obviously and the effects very instantaneously, and then move into those more long-term indirect consequences or human impacts. So we're going to go in this order as well. So starting with habitat destruction. So what is habitat destruction? Our definition is when people clear or damage natural areas where animals and plants live. Would, if I were you, store this bullet point. You really want to keep the definitions clear and make sure they stand out to you. So this is essentially destruction means to destroy. This is destroying habitats. When humans destroy habitats. So those natural areas are the habitats where animals and plants are living. Examples of how habitats may be destroyed are cutting forests, draining swamps, and building cities and roads. So, first human impact is habitat destruction, destroying natural areas. So, how does it happen? I do want to start with, throughout this presentation, I am just going over some of the big causes and the big ways that these impacts occur. I do want to say that this is not the all-exhaustive list of everything. There is way more impacts, way more consequences, way more ways that these impacts occur than just the list that I will go over. So I just want to kind of have that stay in your mind that my list does not cover every and is not all comprehensive. I am going over the major ones for each of the impacts. So how it happens. The 3 big ones for habitat destruction is clearing land. This means cutting down forests, draining wetlands, and building roads and cities. So this is just completely clearing land that was natural, that was just naturally existing, and using it for other purposes usually. So cutting down forests, usually to do so for cattle farms, for, yes, to use the resources, but to build homes, usually to use those areas for other resources. Draining wetlands, again, to use those things for other resources or to use the water, but usually to use that land for something else. And then building roads and cities, obviously that takes up land. Whatever land that we're building roads and cities no longer is natural. We have used it for urbanization. Fragmentation. This is a word too I want to point out. You will see some words later on that really focus, or some questions throughout the next activities that talk about fragmentation, and you have to use this term, so I want to kind of point it out to you. Fragmentation is essentially the idea of breaking one large habitat into many small pieces. This causes the issue of where animals can't move freely. So fragmentation happens when we also build cities and build roads. When we're building roads, especially like think through a forest, that those roads are cutting that forest now into 2 separate areas, into one instead of just one continuous forest. Then pollution damage. So habitats are now, this is basically when A habitat has been polluted, has experienced so much pollution that it is made unsafe. Therefore, the habitat is destroyed for those living things that used to have it. So examples of this would be oil spills, chemicals in the soil, water that has experienced so much fertilizer pollution that the oxygen has been drained due to algae blooms. All of those are examples of how pollution can destroy a habitat and make it basically unlivable for organisms and living things. So moving on to some picture examples. I am personally one that likes to have visuals of what's going on. So deforestation, this is clearing of land as an example of deforestation. Here is deforestation. De meaning getting rid of forests. So we are cutting down forests in deforestation. So here, this big plot of land, this used to all be covered in trees. They have been cut down either for the land to be used for other purposes or for those trees to be used as resources. Fragmentation is this idea of taking one large ecosystem, one large area, and cutting it into smaller pieces. So you can see that here with farms. We have all these smaller areas. This used to all be one big forest, but now we have the smaller areas, and the living things can have just a smaller range to live and move throughout, because humans have fragmented or broken up the natural land into smaller pieces. Then you have pollution damage. So this is a very sad picture of basically where the natural habitat that these elephants would normally be roaming through has been polluted so much, and probably their habitat has been urbanized, or like cities and towns have been built so much into their habitat that now they're experiencing difficulty finding food and the resources they need to survive because their habitat has been destroyed due to pollution. Moving on. So, human connection. Again, these are human impacts. So, these are humans causing this destruction of habitats. So, why do we do it, and what do we lose? What are the human consequences to it? So, why do humans destroy habitats? One is to build homes, roads, and cities. This idea of urbanization, of making homes for people, of building and developing areas. Here in the desert, we call it desert sprawl, of sprawling out across the desert. And as we do that, we are taking desert land that are homes for our native species and instead turning it into destroying those ecosystems and turning them into homes in our cities. We also destroy habitats to grow crops and to raise animals. So, for example, the Amazon rainforest has experienced a lot of deforestation for farms and to raise cattle. So a lot of trees have been cut down purely for the purpose of using that land instead for raising cattle due to the high demand for beef products throughout the world. But we are taking that land, destroying all the naturally existing homes and roles and food webs to instead use it for something else. And to also collect resources such as wood, minerals, and other resources. But as we collect these resources, if we're not careful and we're not just taking what we need, we can destroy the ecosystem, destroy the habitat, and make it where we can't continue to use it and other living things can't continue to live in it. So what we lose when we destroy habitats, so not only do the living things just experience consequences, the living things that live within the habitat, but us humans also experience consequences by habitat destruction. So we experience fewer trees, which are very much needed to not only soak up and store carbon to reduce the amount of heat being trapped in the atmosphere, but our trees also help to clean our air by producing oxygen. Less habitats, less trees though. Less habitats also mean less clean water and less safe soil because these habitats have natural decomposers, natural balances to ensure that the water cycle is staying safe, everything is balanced and safe, but as we destroy the habitats, we are interfering with those balances. And then we lose natural protection from floods and climate change, and we lose homes for animals and plants may disappear. So there's definitely major consequences, but sometimes people may feel that what we gain, the resources and the homes, are worth more than what we lose. But these are major, major consequences here. All right, moving on. So you have a picture or you have a box on your paper to answer this question. Using this picture here on the screen, you're going to pause the video and you're going to answer this question using this picture in your own words. So looking at this picture of this habitat and the organisms that live there, such as the rodent, the bunny, the bird, the crane, things like that. Imagine that this habitat is destroyed. For example, maybe cleared for farming, housing, or roads. Which living things would be directly affected and how would they be affected? So go ahead, pause the video, tell me what living things would be affected if this habitat was destroyed and what would their consequences, what would those effects be? Alrighty, so I went ahead and answered this question as well myself. So looking at this, I see a couple living things right off the bat, like I said. I see the bird, the crane, the fish, the mice or the rodents, and the bunny, along with the living things such as the plants, the mushroom, the roots, the lily pads, the grass, trees. I see all of these different living organisms. If this ecosystem were to be destroyed, first of all, the mouse and the rabbit would lose shelter and would be eaten more easily, especially with the rabbit relying on the bushes and the vegetation to take cover. And if the habitat was destroyed, the mouse would lose that safe soil to be living in. They would then be exposed, making it where they're going to be eaten more easily. Then the animals that eat them would eventually go hungry because their populations are going to drop. As their population drops, then their predators' population are going to drop. Then eventually, with no plants left either, if the habitat is destroyed, then all the herbivores would die out and the birds would leave to find a new home. So we would see total collapse, especially if all of the producers are removed with this habitat, then nothing can exist there. All right, so impact number 1, habitat destruction, destroying habitats and the consequences that come with it. Now, impact number 2, overexploitation. So what is overexploitation? This definition is huge to take notice of. I would star that if I were you. So overexploitation is taking more animals, plants, or resources in general than nature can replace. And essentially, this is the idea of being selfish, of us taking advantage of nature and taking more than what we need, taking it faster than than nature itself can replenish or provide back or replace. So examples of overexploitation can be too much fishing or overfishing, hunting of rare animals, overhunting, and cutting down of too many trees. So deforestation, if we're causing the deforestation to get these trees, then sometimes, as you'll notice, our human impacts can double dip. Where if the purpose of the habitat destruction was to take all of the resources, then overexploitation can cause habitat destruction. So a lot of these can overlap with one another, just kind of as a heads up. But overexploitation is taking more resources than nature can replace. So how does it happen? How does overexploitation occur? So some big ones again. This list is not all exhaustive. There is more than just this of how it occurs, but here are some big ones. Overhunting or overfishing. My bad. Uh, this is when animals are taken faster than they can reproduce. So overfishing is when we are fishing way more than is available in our water systems. We are taking more fish than can be reproduced. Overhunting is the same, but not in the water, with land animals. So, or animals in the air, technically too, or birds. But overhunting these specimens, these organisms, faster than they can reproduce, and the populations can basically causing the populations to become unstable. Also, high demand species. What this essentially is that some rare organisms or organisms that have parts of them that are in high demand, high want, are more likely to be hunted or poached, and therefore is causing this overexploitation, this overuse of them. So examples of this is ivory from elephants or sharks, the fins from sharks. And essentially these organisms are hunted and overhunted because they are worth a lot of money. They have something rare, they have something of value, and so they get overexploited, overhunted to try to get that rare or that highly sought after aspect of them. Then you have illegal trade. This is when endangered animals that are at risk of going extinct, and plants that are also endangered are basically sold on the black market or traded illegally. Um, and this is considered overexploitation because these are already endangered species. These are species and populations that need to be protected. But because they're rare, they're endangered, they can be overexploited and get highly sought after and start to be traded a lot, sold a lot, which puts their numbers into more danger. Then you also have overharvesting of plants or resources. So this is taking too many trees, herbs, minerals, which then causes the land to be left bare and weak. This is going back to that example of overexploitation can cause habitat destruction. So these can overlap. Big thing with it is habitat destruction doesn't always occur because we're trying to get a resource. Sometimes it's occurring because we just need to use that land for a different purpose. Overexploitation is this idea of taking and wanting this resource and wanting more of it than nature can provide. So examples and visuals. Overfishing and overhunting. Here off to the side is an example of overhunting. Overfishing is just the same but with fishing. So example here with birds, taking way more than what is necessary, and more than what nature can provide, because they may be rare, or they're a cool bird, or whatever, a cool animal. Then you have high demand animals. So here is a bunch of tusks, and these tusks provide ivory, which is a highly sought after material. It's expensive. And so these elephants are being overexploited specifically for this high demand material of ivory. And then over harvesting. So here is an example of deforestation due to needing the lumber, the wood from the trees. So taking more than what the ecosystem can replace in time. And so this habitat is being completely destroyed by this overexploitation of wood. So why do people do it, and what do we lose? So people, overexploitation occurs because humans need food. For example, that overhunting, that overfishing, especially overfishing, occurs a lot due to demands in seafood. Another is to make money from rare animals or plants, or to make money just from the resources, and to get those resources for building and for making energy. So to essentially get what we need for our economies and to make our resources and our products throughout our basically society. And what do we lose? So overexploitation can cause us to lose populations of important animals and plants. And then essentially we can either just completely lose the populations, or those populations can shrink considerably to where they get put on the endangered list. They are in danger of going extinct. We can also lose jobs and food sources when that species is completely overexploited and taken advantage of to the point that they disappear. For example, areas that have been overfished to the max, to where the fish can no longer reproduce and the fish disappear in that area. Well, if there was the communities in that area really relied on the fish as a food source, they are now losing their food. And if there's jobs tied to those fisheries in that area, those jobs are gone. So if we take too much and hurt an ecosystem or hurt a habitat, then we can potentially hurt the people that live in that area and rely on those resources, and we can hurt the jobs that rely on those resources. And then cultures and traditions that rely on certain species can be harmed if those species are basically taken to the point of extinction or endangerment. So practice question: why is overfishing a problem for people as well as fish? So this is a two-part question. Why is overfishing bad for humans? Why is it bad for fish? Pause the video, answer the question on that blank space in the worksheet, and then we'll go over it together. I'll show you kind of what my thinking process was with it. Alrighty, go ahead and pause it. Alrighty, so let's see what I put down. So why is overfishing a problem for people as well as fish? If too many fish are caught, then the fish population is going to drop, and essentially any organism that relied on that specific species of fish within the food web is going to be affected. They're no longer going to have that food source, and so their population is going to go down. And then the domino effect occurs. Whatever fish relies on that fish then, because the populations have dropped, their population is going to drop. And the domino effect, the consequences are just going to keep bleeding through the rest of the food web. So a major food source is lost for all of the fish and all of the food webs that exist within that area, within that water source. And then the people within that area, if that ecosystem gets overfished to the point where the habitat is destroyed and there is no more fish left to be fished for, then all of the jobs that existed in that area no longer exist, and all of the people that relied on that seafood are no longer going to have that source of seafood there. So humans are affected because they lose a food source and a job source. Fish are affected, or the ocean ecosystem is affected because part of the food web is lost, which can affect all of the other organisms, can cause that ripple effect. All right, moving on to impact number 3, pollution. So what is pollution? Again, I'm going to start this definition. This is when harmful substances are put into the air, water, or soil. So there's a large array of what these harmful substances can be. They can be in the form of gas, of liquid, of solids. These are usually different chemicals. And those chemicals, again, can be found in different formats. So examples of that can be plastic waste, oil spills are a form of pollution, pesticides, which are chemicals to kill pests, smoke from cars and factories. All of these are examples of pollution. Harmful substances. So how does it occur? Couple big ones. I broke pollution into the 4 big categories of air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution, and trash pollution. So air pollution. Air pollution is caused by cars and factories that release smoke and gases that harm air quality, which then we're going to learn later causes another human impact, climate change, and it goes back to our carbon cycle. These cars and factories release the smoke that is rich in carbon. That carbon gets trapped in the atmosphere. Since we're getting so much extra atmosphere or carbon trapped in the atmosphere, more heat is being trapped. And not only does it trap heat, but it can harm our air quality as well, making it unsafe to breathe the air. Then we have water pollution. This is when chemicals, plastics, or waste are thrown or flow into rivers, lakes, and oceans. This can be dangerous because of the living things that may eat the pollution within the water, which can affect their diet and can affect their health, but it can also affect the basically how clean the water is for us to cycle back into the water cycle, which then causes, if polluted water gets cycled back into the water cycle, we get things like acid rain. Soil pollution. This is when our soil is polluted with things such as pesticides, fertilizers, or even just waste. And the soil basically becomes so polluted that it can change and make the soil unsafe. If things grow in that soil, they can experience either they just can't grow, they experience decay and death, or they're going to experience abnormalities that make it hard for them to survive. And another form of pollution can be trash buildup. And this is things when, pretty self-explanatory, trash builds up. So plastics and other waste don't break down and they can spread throughout the ecosystem, and they can build up and basically break down that habitat and break down how healthy the habitat is. So, examples, we have trash buildup, making it where plants don't have areas to grow, it's unsafe for living things to live there, toxins are more likely to build up. We have water pollution. This is an example of an oil spill, so the water being polluted with oil that has been spilt into the ocean. And then air pollution, smog and smoke being sent into the air and polluting our atmosphere and affecting the air quality. So, why do people do pollution, and what can we lose from pollution? What are the consequences? So, why does pollution happen? Why do humans allow it to occur? So, pollution can occur from farming chemicals to grow food. Herbicides, pesticides, insecticides, all of these are chemicals that help crops survive against pests and insects and things that are trying to eat the crops. And this is good because we need the crops for food, for our grocery stores, and for humans to eat. And we want the crops and as many crops to survive as possible so the farmers can get as much money off of their crop and so that as much food can be sent out to humans as possible. The issue is that as these chemicals are put onto the plants and the crops and rain and storms occur, that water can wash those chemicals down into our waterways. This is known as runoff, and this can cause pollution to occur in the soil and in water and to enter our water cycle. So sometimes the pollution isn't, we're not trying to pollute those specific areas, but because of our cycles and the flow of matter, it can cause that pollution to enter new locations. Pollution occurs because of energy use. We rely on non-renewable resources known as fossil fuels. Non-renewable means they do not replenish themselves, or it takes a very, very long time to replenish themselves. We can run out of it. Also, the issue with fossil fuels are they're supposed to be major carbon reservoirs. They're supposed to be holding on to carbon for long periods of time. But when we burn and combust these fossil fuels, all of that carbon they've been holding on to enters our atmosphere, which pollutes our air. And then poor waste disposal, such as throwing away plastics, dumping of trash. Issue with plastic is it is not biodegradable and it takes a very, very, very long time to break down, which means it does build up because it's not breaking down. What we lose from pollution, we lose clean air to breathe and clean water to drink. We lose healthy soil for farming, safe food because our fish and our animals can eat these toxins, these pollutions, and pass them on to us. And then we lose money because it costs extra for people and governments to clean up this pollution and try to reverse the effects of pollution. So, real quick, some little nerdy topic, bioaccumulation and biomagnification. This is what happens when pollution accumulates in living things. Again, bio meaning living, bio equals life. So just keep that in mind, bio equals life. So both of these have to deal with bio living. So bioaccumulation is what happens when pollution builds up inside of one animal's body. And this pollution accumulates, these toxins accumulate over time with in this one organism's lifetime. So each time this organism eats more polluted and toxin-filled food, contaminated food, the amount of that toxin will increase in their body, as we can see in this picture here. First, they started off eating just a little bit, and as their life progressed and they got older and they continued that diet, that toxin built up and accumulated or built up more within their life. Biomagnification happens with food webs. So as toxins move up a food chain or a food web, they get stronger at each level. This is because as we move up the food chain, the top predator needs to eat a lot of living organisms. And because they have to eat so much living organisms below them, that toxin magnifies or becomes even stronger. So top predators eat many contaminated animals, so they collect the most amount of toxins. This makes top predators, tertiary consumers such as eagles, sharks, humans, bears, these tertiary top dogs, most at risk for biomagnification. Moving on. So a quick practice problem. Give one example of each of the following, of air pollution, water pollution, and soil pollution, and you can pull these from your notes, but go ahead, pause the video, and answer this question in your notes on the empty box. Alrighty, so looking through this and looking through our examples, for air pollution, I came up with pollution from cars, because I also talked about factories. But for this, I'm specifically just brought up from car exhaust or from car gases. Water pollution can come from plastic waste that's thrown into the ocean. And my example of soil pollution is from pesticides or insecticides or fertilizers, whatever you want to choose, from farms. And basically, those chemicals can soak into the soil and make the soil unsafe over time. Alrighty, number 4, invasive species. So what are invasive species? We're going to star that definition. Invasive species are non-native organisms that are introduced to a new environment, an environment they do not belong in. And because they do not belong in this environment, they spread quickly and they can outcompete those native species, ultimately causing major harm to the ecosystem. This is considered a human impact because it's human actions that bring these organisms to the new environment, the new area that they do not belong. They're able to outcompete and do better than the native species in that area because they don't have natural predators. There is not things in that environment naturally built to eat them and keep their populations in check. So some examples, some common ones are zebra mussels that have entered the Great Lakes in the US, cane toads within Australia, and here on this example, the spotted lanternfly in the United States. So non-native coming to a new area and they destroy that new area. All right. So how does it happen? Again, this is considered a human impact because humans are bringing these species over. It is humans causing these species to come to these new areas where they ultimately destroy the new environment. So, a common way that invasive species travel is through travel and trade. So, things such as ships, planes, trucks carry seeds, insects, animals to new places. And a lot of times this is on accident. These animals, insects, or seeds kind of hitchhike, are either blown on by, for example, the seeds, they're blown on by wind, or the insects and animals are just resting, whatever the purpose it is, but they end up getting sent to new places through these forms of human transportation. Then there's accidental release. So pets or aquarium species escape into the wild, or sometimes also people purposefully release their pets that they can't take care of anymore into the wild, which can also harm the environment they're introduced to. Then there's intentional release. Sometimes humans will purposely bring in plants or animals or insects to a new area, an area that this organism, this living thing, does not naturally exist in, because they want that living thing to solve a problem. For example, maybe they want to eat a certain insect that they find a pest, or get rid of a certain plant. The issue is that sometimes they can spread out of control and the humans lose control of this organism that they purposely brought over. And again, it is key to point out that the reason that they spread so quickly is because they have no natural predators. They have nothing naturally going after them and knowing how to kill them, and so their population goes unchecked and they can reproduce fast and take over. So, I'm going to have you end this video, and this is right underneath this video, you will find this link. You're going to watch this, and then you will go and move on to the final third video within this to finish 2.1. But to finish 2.1, you do got to watch this video. It goes into more depth about invasive species, a major part of this standard. So go ahead. This video is going to end. Watch the video underneath this, which is this TED Ed video. And then under this TED Ed, you will find the final section of this 2.2 or 2.1 notes.